From Detroit's North End, it's time for Your Daily Detroit. I'm Jer Stays. On today's show for Tuesday, February 11th, 2020, I'll share some stories around town, and then Sven Gustafson has a conversation with Glenn Stevens of MICHAUTO. They'll talk about the future of electrification, what's next in front of the realities of climate change and hyper-urbanization, and how will Michigan companies react. Let's just get right into it. There's a new chapter ahead for the historic Bonstelle Theater. Built originally as the Temple Bethel Synagogue in 1903, the beautiful dome structure has served as the Bonstelle since 1925. It'll be part of a 10-story, 150-room AC hotel by Marriott on Woodward in Brush Park. It'll be just south of Mack Avenue and will be developed by the Roxybury Group. There will be new construction for the hotel tower with a glass atrium that has a bar, of course, connecting all of this together. So now you'll actually be able to do a little middle Woodward bar crawl. Hello, hammer and nail. Also interesting on this project is they're restoring the Bonstelle to the original exterior look, which had a Woodward-facing set of arched entrances. And look, the pictures are simply stunning. Few living today have actually seen this in person. I will link to the photos in the show notes on historicdetroit.org of what it used to look like. This theater space will be converted and used for conferences and meetings. Roxbury, has an impressive track record, including the redo of the jaw-dropping David Whitney building in downtown Detroit. If you have not seen that lobby yet, I strongly encourage you to. It's just beautiful. The project is pegged to cost $46 million, and construction should wrap up in late 2021. Out in Roseville, voices continue to rise and raise issues with a plan the city approved last month to turn most of the old Sacred Heart Parish on Gratiot into a self-storage and retail development. The plan would demolish the church built in the 1950s, with roots to the Civil War, except for the bell tower, which would be either saved or reconstructed as is. Now, a Change.org petition is circulating in favor of protecting the church, with nearly 2,500 signatures as of this recording, and growing fast. The petition says that the city has enough self-storage units, and maybe some other use could be found. I will put a link to that in the show notes. A quick heads up that I-94 on the east side of Detroit is going to close in both directions over the next 2 weekends. It's to demolish the East Grand Boulevard Bridge. The closure will be between I-75 and Gratiot, so it's a pretty big area, with the entrance ramps to I-94 also closed. So it's serious detour time this Valentine's Day weekend. That'll start this Friday night at 9 p.m. and run till rush hour Monday, and the same next week, the 21st through the 24th. All right, here's Sven's conversation with Glenn Stevens, recorded at the Detroit Policy Conference.
Joining us here at the Detroit Policy Conference 2020 is an old friend of Daily Detroit. You've been on the show many times, Glenn Stevens. How are you, Glenn?
I'm great. I always enjoy this. You guys, I love following you guys on social media and listening. Really appreciate the work you do.
Absolutely. Glenn is Executive Director of MICHAUTO, which is the Detroit Regional Chamber's automotive wing, essentially.
Right.
We had you on last year here at the conference, and we talked a lot about kind of just broad trends of shaping the industry, one of which was electric vehicles, obviously. It's been a big year for electric vehicles in general. Well, I guess what has changed since a year ago, since we last spoke, Glenn?
Wow, a lot.
Yeah.
In this industry, it changes by the day, and certainly you can see seismic changes over year to year right now. But if you look at from an EV standpoint, and you just look at Detroit, I mean, just this week you had a $2.2 billion announcement by General Motors in the Hamtramck plant, which is incredible. 2,200 jobs will be protected and grown, and they're going to build all EVs there, and they'll build their autonomous Origin shuttle there. You got the launch of the Ford Mach-E, which was phenomenal, the Mustang.
The Mustang Mach-E,
right.
Yeah.
You got the new...
Controversial. A lot of people had strong opinions about them using the Mustang
They
brand.
do, but what Ford did to bring that product to market and what they're doing is incredible. And then you got companies like Rivian. Rivian's a new player,
yeah,
but they've had, almost $2 billion of investment between Amazon, Ford, and a fund led by T. Rowe Price.
Right.
And they're headquartered here, and they're getting ready to start building their all-electric pickups and SUVs. So, I mean, this is quite a seismic shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Good news, obviously, for plants like Detroit Hamtramck, the GM plant, which was, is losing some products, and they're going to be, I think, closed for a while to retool. So definitely good news and good news for jobs and everything. But one of the things that we talk about and we always hear is that electric vehicles are going to be very disruptive for the industry as well as sort of the future. I mean, we're talking about vehicles that are just going to require fewer and fewer moving parts. It's a completely different design from the internal combustion engine.
Right.
So I guess what can we do to prepare for that here as a region?
That's a perfect example of the shift that's happening. So it's an extreme example, but you could put it in the context of, in an internal combustion engine system, there's around 2,000 components, and in a pure EV, there's around 20. So
wow.
Right there. So that if you think about what the repercussions are to the supply chain, the companies that we have in Detroit or Jackson or Flint or Grand Rapids, their market has always been the internal combustion engine. As the market shifts, they have to figure out, okay, we're at an inflection point too. How do we make sure as a small company or a large company, we take the upward turn on the inflection point and we don't get, crushed by the inflection point, because it's a major change. So this is something that the state's aware of, we as an organization are aware of, that we have to make sure we transition with the way mobility is transitioning.
Mm-hmm. Electric vehicles still make up a very small portion of the overall U.S. sales market.
They do.
About 2%.
Right.
Do you worry at all that maybe we're putting the cart too far ahead of the horse, and that consumers aren't going to react? They're not going. I mean, Rivian has beautiful vehicles, no question, but they're not cheap. They're $70,000 and up.
Right, but they also have 100,000 vehicle order from Amazon.
Right.
For delivery vehicles. So that's kind of what's going to get them going. But to your point, you're right. I mean, there's an adoption curve. And in our country, because government mandates are not as heavy as they might be in China or the European Union with regards to electric vehicles.
And they're going the other way here.
Right. The consumer's going to drive this. But, fact is, climate change, hyper-urbanization, these things are real. And so the market has to shift with what the consumer wants. But these vehicles are going to start to gradually become more and more. Now, the other issue with that is there has to be an infrastructure to support them too. So
yes.
That's something. In fact, we're working on that. Senator McMurrow has introduced legislation to put more charging stations in the state, particularly in our state parks. So we are looking at that piece of the pie too.
I would assume you've probably driven an electric vehicle before, yes?
I have. I've been in the Tesla factory a couple times. I've been in their R&D and headquarters and driven their vehicles. Haven't driven any of the Detroit 3's EVs. It's quite a different experience, particularly when you are punching it in a safe spot. I mean, it's just a completely different experience.
People I've spoken to who have driven electric vehicles, I have not, but people who I've spoken to who have say that they love it. I mean, I've never heard anybody say, oh, it's no big deal. I mean, everybody loves it, and they're like, I don't want to drive a gas car again,
Right. It's a different experience. I mean, even the technology, because there's no sound
right.
with the vehicle. There's even companies that are looking at putting sound to the vehicles, and really from a safety standpoint.
So that pedestrians can hear you coming and
so forth. It is a big
yeah.
issue. But the point is that this is happening. Mr. Musk is lightning rod controversial as is. He is a tipping point. And the market is developing. It's certainly developing in China and European Union. And it's going to be a little slower here, but it's definitely happening.
Speaking of Tesla, their market capitalization recently reached $100 billion. $100 billion, which is more than the value of Ford and GM combined. How big of a concern is that?
Well, I look, it's a market reality. It's really hard to get your hands around, though, because if you look at Tesla, and I'll round the numbers a little bit, but basically sold under 400,000 vehicles last year, has a market cap of over 100 billion. Put that in context of Volkswagen, which delivered 11 million units last year and has a market cap just under 100 million or 100 billion. And it's hard to make that make sense, but the fact is this is what's happening.
Yeah. Wall Street's always fuzzy math and kind of ephemeral anyway.
Yeah, I don't try to figure it out.
Right. Another thing I know you're really excited about is the startup scene that's happening here. Big announcement a couple weeks ago that seems to have largely flown under the radar with something called Plug and Play that Fiat Chrysler is involved in. Tell us about that.
Right. So one of the things that we, MICHAUTO, and along with the state of Michigan, the Planet M team, our different economic development partners, we've really focused on the startup system for mobility and Industry 4.0. We haven't been typically known for that. Now, if you go back 100 years in Detroit, we were very much, you've heard this expression, a Silicon Valley of innovation for automotive back then. Well, we're seeing it happening again because we're really focusing on it. So one of the big announcements is Plug and Play, which is a Silicon Valley-based accelerator, has partnered with FCA and the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council to launch a new accelerator. It'll be in Detroit, and that's very positive news for the ecosystem. More money is being invested in these companies. More companies are coming here because it's a great ecosystem for a startup to be in.
How so? How is it a great ecosystem? I mean, obviously we have lots of automotive talent, like a real concentration of engineering talent especially. But what about, I mean, the one thing that's always been kind of missing from the scene, glaringly, I guess, is venture capital, right? Investment money.
So last year, I looked at the numbers the other day. Actually, we had a record year for venture capital investments in Michigan, according to the MVCA, and that's a positive sign. But why you would want to be here is you have an incredible amount of consumers of innovation. With 21 OEMs here, 96 of the top tier suppliers in the world located here, technology firms here, service companies here. If you've got an idea, say in mobility or Industry 4.0, you want to be in the middle of these consumers of innovation because they're the ones that are going to put these in the vehicle, that technology. So that's why it's a great place for a startup to be here.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you use the phrase a few times now, Industry 4.0. That's a new one to me. I haven't heard 4.0. I thought we were transitioning to 2.0 auto or whatever.
Well, on the shop floor and on the manufacturing floor, it's basically, and it really emanated out of Germany, it's the fourth industrial revolution.
Oh.
And that's where cyber meets physical. So when you look at these new technologies that are on the shop floor, whether it's additive manufacturing, machine learning, cloud-based computing in the plant system, these are innovations that make things stronger, quicker, faster, more efficient with new technologies in the manufacturing environment. And we're really good at that. And for example, Tom Kelly and his team up at Automation Alley have really been leading the charge in that area. So Industry 4.0 and mobility, we like to put it in the context of we know how to build things and we know how to innovate things. Why shouldn't we build and innovate the next generation of mobility ideas in systems or cars or vehicles? For example, the Cruise Origin.
Yeah. Last thing I want to ask you about, and this is something that I think partly came out of the poll that the Chamber released the other day, statewide poll on distracted driving, that you asked people about whether they would support legislation to ban the use of mobile phones while driving, and you found pretty broad support. 88% people support that.
We did.
What kind of work are you guys doing behind the scenes?
Right. So as you may know, you're allowed to, by law, still use your phone in your vehicle today. You just can't text. But that doesn't prevent you from posting on Instagram or checking something else on your computer or on your mobile device. We, along with the coalition that we're helping to lead, want to put effective distracted driving law in place to ban the use of cell phones unless it's hands-free. And so what we're doing, Jason Puskitz, who's the head of MICHAUTO's government affairs team, is helping to lead a coalition with Lansing, with legislators, with some private industry, with the Kiefer Foundation. Steve Kiefer from General Motors' son was lost in a distracted driving. So we're working to build this coalition, and we're working very, very diligently with them to get hands-free legislation passed in Lansing.
All right. Well, Glenn Stevens, Executive Director of MICHAUTO. Always enjoy catching up with you, Glenn. Thanks for coming by Daily Detroit.
It's always good to have this opportunity. Thanks, Sven.
Well, thanks so much for listening to your Daily Detroit. In a sure sign of spring, pitchers and catchers reported today for spring training down in Lakeland for the Detroit Tigers. Now, someone of my age remembers the legendary Ernie Harwell. He was a Tigers broadcaster, and he started this Detroit baseball tradition around this time each year. And that's a springtime reading of this passage of the Song of Solomon from the Old Testament. He did it best, but frankly, we don't have the rights to play his version, and I can't find a clean recording. So I'll keep the fire alive best that I can. For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of the singing birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.